Hello friends, in this lecture, we're going to start working on the enemy's attack. Okay, so let me explain how the enemy's attack is going to work. Once the enemy is close enough to the player, it's going to attack. After it attacks, it's going to go in a cooldown state. We're going to start a timer, and when the timer times out, the cooldown is going to be over, and the enemy is going to be able to attack again. The attack animation will be played using an override, just like we did for the player. So let's go ahead and start working on this. First of all, we're going to create an override slot inside of the animation blueprint for the enemy, just like we did for the player. So let's right click, override slot, create a new one, and then we're going to connect it to the state machine and to the output, just like that. Let's save this, compile it, and then switch over to Visual Studio. First of all, we're going to create the functions and the variables that we're going to use for this. The first one is going to be the attack animation sequence as a variable inside of here, just like we did for the player. So we can actually go ahead and copy and paste that from the player's header, this one right here, into the enemy's header, just underneath the follow target. After that, we're going to create a boolean called canAttack, which is going to control if the enemy can attack or not. CanAttack, just like that. After this, we're going to create the delegate that we're going to use with the override animation call. So the same thing we did for the player, basically. We can also go ahead and copy and paste that from here into the enemy. After that, we're going to create a timer to keep track of the attack cooldown, and that is going to be ftimer handle attack cooldown timer. And the last variable we're going to create is going to be a float that's going to control how long the cooldown is going to take. So let's go ahead and create that. So let's copy and paste this one just underneath the hit points. We're going to call it attack cooldown in seconds. And I'm going to set this to be 3 seconds by default. So the enemy is going to attack, wait 3 seconds before it can attack again. Awesome. Those are going to be the variables. We're also going to create some functions at the bottom here. The first one is going to be attack, just like that. The second one is going to be the function that the timer is going to call. We're going to call that void on attack cooldown timer timeout. And the last one is going to be the function the override delegate is going to call. And we're going to name that on attack anim override anim end. And this will accept a boolean called completed. Great, so let's go ahead and create these functions inside of the C++ file at the bottom. Create the function bodies. Always very fun to do this, I know. Just like that. So before we implement this, we're going to make a call to attack inside of the tick function. So right here in the else statement, this means we're close enough to the player, and inside of here we're going to attack. Before we attack though, we're going to check if the follow target is alive. And if that is the case, we're going to attack. Just like that. We're also going to, inside of take damage, we're also going to set canAttack to false so that the enemy doesn't attack after it's dead. We're also going to bind the delegate to the function in begin play. So after we call update HP, we'll say on attack override and delegate dot bind uObject. And the function is going to be a enemy on attack override anim end, just like that. So now the function is connected to the delegate. Now we can start implementing these functions. We're going to first implement attack. Before we attack, we're going to make a check. Are we alive? Can we attack? And are we stunned? So we shouldn't be stunned. So we're going to say is not stunned. If all of these are true, then we're going to attack. First of all, we're going to set can attack to false and also can move to false so that we don't move while we attack. After this, we're going to play the attack animation sequence as an override, just like we did with the player. As a small challenge, see if you can do that yourself. Okay, we're going to call getAnimInstance. Then we're going to call play animation override. This will take in the sequence, which is attack anim sequence, the name of the override slot, which is going to be default slot. The play rate is going to be 1, starting position will be 0, start from the beginning, and then we're going to give the delegate, which is on attack override and delegate. Awesome, that is going to play the attack animation as an override, and after we do that, we're going to set up the attack cooldown timer. Again, as a small challenge, see if you can do that yourself. Let's call getWorldTimerManager, set timer, attack cooldown timer, The function is going to be aEnemy on attack cooldown timer timeout, and the duration is going to be attack cooldown in seconds, just like that. When the attack animation is over, this function is going to get called. I'm actually going to move it up like that. And inside of this function, if the enemy is alive, we're going to set can move to true again. And inside of the timer's timeout function, we're going to set can attack to true again. So this is different to what we did in the player. In the player, we were setting can attack to true inside of the delegates function. So we can take a look at that. As you can see, inside of the delegate function, we're setting can attack to true. This time it's going to be different because we don't want the enemy to be able to attack that soon. We want it to have a longer cooldown period. That's why we created this timer. So because of that, only when the timer times out, we're going to set can attack to true again. So the enemy is going to be able to move after it attacks, but it's not going to be able to attack again until the timer is, over. So that's going to be all we need to do here in order to play the attack animation sequence once the enemy is close enough to the player. And then we're going to start the timer, and when the timer times out, we're going to set can attack to true again so that the enemy can play the animation again. Of course, we're going to implement the attack collision box and the animation notify state so that the enemy can actually hit the player, but currently we're just trying to play the animation. So let's go ahead and exit out of Unreal, rebuild the project, and then we're going to test this. So let's go ahead and open up the enemy's blueprint so that we can set the attack animation sequence. Right here, we're going to set this to be Krabby Attack. Let's save and compile and test the game. Once the enemy is close enough to the player, it should attack, then wait for 3 seconds and attack again, and then repeat. And as you can see, that is working. The enemy is also able to move after it attacks, but it has to wait for the timer to finish before it can attack again, even though it can keep moving. So it seems like everything we did is working correctly. Of course, the next step here is going to be creating the collision box for the enemy so that it can actually hurt the player. But we're going to do that in an upcoming lecture. Let's do a recap in this one before we end it. So first of all, in this lecture, we created the override slot. Wait, this is the captain, sorry. The override slot for the enemy right here. And after that, we implemented these functions. The most important one here is, of course, the attack function. We're calling this inside of tick once the enemy is close enough to the player, if the player is still alive. Inside of the attack function, we're setting these booleans to false so that the enemy stops attacking and the enemy stops moving. After that, we play the attack animation sequence as an override, and then we set up the attack cooldown timer. Once the override animation is over, if the enemy is still alive, we set can move to true again so that the enemy can keep moving again. And once the timer is over, we set can attack to true so that the enemy can attack again. So that's all we did in this lecture. So before we end the lecture, there's one final thing I want to show, and we actually have a bug inside of the code. The thing is, we can interrupt the enemy while it's attacking if we attack it before it finishes the attack animation. Just like this. But this doesn't work if the enemy dies while attacking, because of the place we're making a call to the stun function. So let me try to demonstrate that. As you can see, the enemy died, but the attack animation still played because the enemy wasn't stunned. And that's because inside of the code here in enemy, we're only making a call to stun if the enemy is still alive after taking damage. So this was a mistake on my part. We actually need to make the call to stun up here. Just like that. Let's go ahead and run live coding. We're going to test the same scenario again. And this time it's going to work. As you can see, the enemy tried to attack, but I killed it, so the attack was interrupted. So that's the fix for that bug.